Welcome to all of our friends who are joining us for the Indian Summer Festival's 5x15 event. Langara College has been a proud sponsor of the festival for many years, and this 10th anniversary is certainly a little different. We are grateful to the festival organizers for putting together such a wonderful and diverse lineup of digital entertainment for us to experience from the comfort of our homes. Now settle in and enjoy tonight's panel of speakers. We look forward to celebrating again together in the future.
Thank you, Lane, and hello and welcome to Indian Summer Festival and this special global edition of 5x15, which we're thrilled to present in partnerships with our friends at 5x15 Stories. Our speakers are spread across 5 countries tonight, and I'm sure you're listening in from many places, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm located in a city currently called Vancouver, which are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, who are the first peoples of this land. These are strange and troubling times, not just because of a global pandemic, but the pandemic has meant that we've had to reinvent ourselves as a festival and do virtual events until we can gather again. So our 10th anniversary edition is more like a rebirth. So far, we've been really heartened that 75,000 unique viewers have seen our events so far from 21 countries and 6 continents. We'll get to Antarctica at some point. Although this event is free to attend, some of you were able to donate to the festival or pay what the price of a ticket would have been. And we're really grateful to you for that. It's really appreciated, and that's the kind of support helps us to keep going. So thank you if you did that. And if you feel so moved to do that during this event, that would also be really appreciated. There are a few organizations who've stuck by us in this tough time and continue to support us as they've done for many years. And our founding partner, Simon Fraser University, has been here throughout. It's our 10th anniversary of that relationship, so that's great to have. And UBC, the University of British Columbia, and Langara College are our major partners as well. And our emerging artist partners, RBC, and many, many more whose support we deeply appreciate. And now I'd like to introduce my co-host and dear friend, Eleanor O'Keefe, who co-founded 5x15, and the reason why Indian Summer Festival has been presenting this format for the last 5 years. Eleanor was one of the early directors of the Jaipur Literature Festival. She co-founded the Palestine Literature Festival, and she's the editorial director of CogX, the world's biggest tech event, which closed just last week with 1,200 speakers from around the world. So I have no idea why she agreed to do this when her brain must surely be melted. She's frighteningly impressive. Please welcome Eleanor. Eleanor, I'm so glad we get to do this together.
Sirish, thank you. Are we up on screen together?
I don't know. I hope we are.
Am I a voice from the crowd? Cloud. There we are. Hello. Sirish, this is I'm so glad to be doing this. It's really, really exciting. And I have to say, you left out an absolutely crucial part of my bio, is that I'm Canadian. And of course, we grew up in Ireland and emigrated to Canada and then went off to live in India. And I am currently speaking from the upstairs room of my parents' house back in West Cork in Ireland. So this is a very exciting event also because it brings together many different strands of my own personal journey. But I'm actually really delighted to be here in person virtually because that's an exciting thing to happen when we've been collaborating from afar for a long time.
I know, it's so nice to get to do this together.
I know, it's so great to be in Vancouver.
Shall we go around and say a quick hello to all the wonderful speakers who've joined us into this virtual green room so that everyone can see them for a second before we get into the order of things?
I think that would be lovely. I think there's going to be a Brady Bunch tile coming up any minute now.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we're making our way backstage. It takes a little while.
Yeah. Here we are, the Brady Bunch.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you all so much for being here. And yeah, somehow we're here. And I think now I'll leave it to Eleanor really to introduce our first speaker. I'm so thrilled, having been such a massive fan, like I'm sure many people have over the years of Ben Okri and what he stands for every single time he says something in the world. So Eleanor, all yours.
Ben, it's a great pleasure, and it's always an honor to have you with us. And even though we have worked together a number of times in the past, I have to say that pleasure of introducing you never diminishes at all. We're speaking this evening if you're in Ireland or the UK or in India, and of course this morning if we're speaking from Canada and the West Coast, about language and how language is the old growth forest of the mind. There are few people, I think, who have used language to such great effect to really tap into a moment and a public mood as effectively as our first speaker this evening. He is the author of The Famished Road, which won the Booker Prize in 1991, and he has since gone on to write a huge number of extraordinary books. His most recent is a volume of stories called Prayer for the Living, and his latest novel is The Freedom Artist. Ben's work has been translated into 25 different languages. He has numerous honorary doctorates. He's the vice president of the English Centre for International Pen. He lives in London. He hails from Nigeria. And I think, Ben, I just want to mention too, that in 2017, there was a terrible tragedy in London in the Grenfell Tower. And your poem on the back of that touched so many millions of people, and it really made sense of a very traumatic moment for many of us who were close to that terrible tragedy. We're so pleased that you are with us today, because you're also going to be reading a recent piece, which again tries to use words to make sense of another terrible and broad tragedy. So if we were all live, I'd ask you to put your hands together. Otherwise, just beam at your screen and welcome Ben Okri. Oh, you're on mute, Ben.
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much, Eleanor, and your legendary 5x15 series. And Sirish, a real pleasure to be working with you all on the Indian Summers Festival. It's been an incredible summer for all sorts of reasons. And I'm going to be reading a piece called On I Can't Breathe, which was my response to the murder of George Floyd. And the aspect that fascinated me the most, apart from the tragic nature of it and the way in which it tells us about the status, the condition of race in America today and around the world, actually, was language. And this festival is one of its key starting points is the idea of river of language. And I was just interested in just 3 words from the tragedy of George Floyd, and that's what my piece is about. It's called On I Can't Breathe. Never in my life has the case of such visible injustice moved white and black people, moved them as human beings. There have been protests all across America, but there have been huge protests all across the world. Why has the murder of George Floyd struck such a profound chord in us? Perhaps the 9 weeks of lockdown purified people's sense of justice and freedom. Also, it was the first big emotional news people heard coming out tentatively from the lockdown, and it hit us like a sledgehammer. But maybe it was the phrase, "I can't breathe." The consonance of the phrase with the very root of our pandemic fears is uncanny. The phrase linked the pandemic with the ubiquitous and implacable nature of institutional racism. I can't breathe. And people were prepared to risk coronavirus just so they could express their protest. There have been many times in the past when Black people have been gagged, strangled, and choked by the police in America and even here in Britain. The names of Black people who have died unjustly at the hands of police are legion. The policemen have mostly gotten off scot-free. What happened to George Floyd isn't new. I can't breathe in any other time would have sparked riots, but not the crossover protest on this universal scale. This time is different. This time it is epochal. Language taps into primal fears. We don't really empathize when we understand. People understand racism. It isn't difficult to understand. But still people don't behave as if they understand. Perhaps we empathize best when we can enter into the condition. I can't breathe suddenly equates racism with the deprivation of air, which is what it always was. Previously, we saw racism, if we saw it at all, as a diminishment of a person's humanity. But that was always too vague. I can't breathe goes beyond saying that you are depriving me of freedom, of humanity, of respect. It says, you are depriving me of the very right to air itself. I can't breathe. We need a new language to express the fundamental clarity of what happens when people are demonized, excluded, deprived, oppressed, and murdered because of the color of their skin. We need a new language for that condition. Only extreme terminal agony could have expressed the very heart of what racism does when George Floyd, whispering, said, I can't breathe. Not even Shakespeare, Walt Whitman, James Baldwin, or Toni Morrison, at their most eloquent, came out with anything as simple in the genius of its truth as, I can't breathe. Maybe it should be the phrase that people who are oppressed should use. It should become the mantra of oppression. Maybe every time the police stop you in your car for no other reason than that you're Black, you should say, I can't breathe. Maybe every time people cross the road in the evenings, when they see you, a placard should be held up that says, I can't breathe. Maybe when jobs are denied you, deserved promotions elude you, or when the police come to windrush deport you, the moment should be recorded on your phone while saying, I can't breathe. Maybe the true response to all the subtle and deadly forms that racism takes should have a new code. I can't breathe. The truth is that I can't breathe hints at the apocalypse of human values. When George Floyd said, I can't breathe, and still the police officer applied the chokehold to his windpipe, it was declared in that moment that a human life means nothing in that country. That's where the apocalypse begins. I can't breathe will become the condition of the world. We ignore the deadly warnings of climate catastrophe. It took the worldwide outcry of the Me Too movement to signal to the world that millions of women are in situations where they can't breathe. Boris Johnson on his respirator, lingering for days between life and death, perhaps knew the meaning of I can't breathe. Across the world right now, we are asking ourselves what it means to be human. When people say they are colorblind, they're being naive. They're in sweet denial. History is not colorblind. Examine the history of slavery and colonialism and genocide. Education is not colorblind. Otherwise, the objective facts of what a people have done and what have been done to a people would be as much a part of the curriculum as the death of Socrates, the plays of Shakespeare, and basic mathematics. Culture is not colorblind. Otherwise, the history of art would include the rock sculpture of Zimbabwe, the radical interventions of David Hammons, and the paintings of Ben Ewonwu. Maybe the real trouble is color deficiency. We know what racism is. It is, finally, the reduction of the human race to the validity of one race. Put another way, it is saying that there is a hierarchy of being human, that some are more human than others, or that some are less. The moment you think, even unconsciously, that one race is superior to another, that is the beginning of murder. It is the beginning of genocide. By small degrees, what is innocently thought of as minor variations of a human hierarchy degenerates into allowing one set of people to suffer and endure conditions that another set of people would not tolerate for themselves. Racism is a human problem. It can be solved. All it takes is facing the truth that many of us have been lied to about history and about other people's humanity. All it takes is realizing that to passively sanction the diminishment of anyone's humanity on any ground is to sanction your own diminishment too. This really isn't rocket science. Racism is a failure to be human. This lack of empathy is part of the problem that is destroying our world. It extends not just to humans, but to other species and to the planet as a whole. That police officer who pressed his knee on George Floyd's neck snuffed out one life, but lit a universal fire. It is deeply moving that the world responded not to the death of a great man or woman, but to the murder of one of the earth's poor and seemingly insignificant people. We know what to do. We must tear out the unconscious racism in our spirit. We must insist on the human rights of all peoples. We must let people live their freedom and their possibilities within the law. This is a great moment in the life of humanity, and it is rich with the possibilities for change. Maybe I Can't Breathe will begin the real change that our world so desperately needs. Let's all breathe.
Ben, thank you. That was really, really beautiful and profound, and so much. There was so much to think about in there. Thank you so much, Ben. There's really so much work to be done, and so much reflection and introspection, and I know the road ahead is long, and the task is very great, but we're really grateful for you for joining us this evening, but even more broadly for sharing your thoughts and sharing your encouragement. I think that's a great thing to be able to give to us as humanity, is encouragement to do better and
join forces.
And join forces.
Join our spirits together to get over this.
Yeah.
This degrading human failing of ours, because it's a human failing. It's nothing less.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So Ben, let me thank you. We're so grateful that you made the time to join us with your beautiful backdrop, which shows the riches of your mind too, not just your bookshelves. But we'll be reading and encouraging you from wherever we are in the world. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Ben. Take care.
Thank you, Sirish.
So our next speaker, actually, I thought that was it's always a hard act to follow, Ben Okri, but our next speaker is Anita Anand, and I know that she's very well capable. But I thought that speaking about a present day outrage and injustice was actually a perfect scene setter for her talk. Anita Anand she's an award-winning journalist. I, living most of the time in London, have the great pleasure of listening to her host a radio show on BBC Radio 4 called Any Answers, which is a show in which the public can call in and demand answers for the public, which is a great exercise, I think, in public democracy. And she hosts it with extraordinary aplomb. But she's not just a journalist, she's also an author. She's written 3 books. First one was Sophia, Princess, Suffragette and Revolutionary, which told the wonderful story of Princess Sophia, the Indian princess. She's just also published The Patient Assassin, a true tale of massacre, revenge, and the Raj, which tells the story of one individual's 20-year quest for justice after a terrible, terrible outrage. Again, please give a very warm welcome to Anita Anand.
Eleanor, thank you so much, and thank you to Sirish, and thank you to all of you who are listening and watching today. I'm speaking to you from a very windy London. You might hear the wind blowing down the chimney at any moment, so apologies for that. I was really very touched. This is almost like a relay race, really. Then the incomparable Ben Okri talking about I Can't Breathe, about George Floyd, about Black Lives Mattering. And if you look at the news here in the UK, it would seem to be really quite fixated on statues of great white men who have lived in the past. And a microscope is now being applied to episodes in history. Colonialism, how do we teach it? How do we learn about it? What do we do with the people who represented it? I know one thing. We have to know about the things that happened. And I'm going to give you one glimpse of one day in colonial India, on a day when Black lives did not matter at all. So let me tell you the city that we're talking about. It is a city in the north of India called Amritsar, and most of you will have heard of it, and you may have heard of it because of this building here, the Golden Temple. Amritsar was the home of the most holy shrine to the Sikhs. This date is in 1919. So a time when Indian soldiers had come back from fighting in a foreign war, a war where they were told that they were fighting for king and country, a war where they were told that they weren't men unless they stood up for the empire. And so they went and they fought, and many died in foreign fields and were buried in foreign soil. And the weeping of their widows and mothers swept across oceans and would never reach them. But they went to fight, even though they didn't understand the languages and the countries that they went to fight. These are some soldiers walking through France, but they went to fight. And they came back having been promised land, riches, recognition, gratitude, that if they fought for king and country, then this king and country may reward them, give them more of a say in the way that their country was run and how their lives would be. But they didn't come back to that at all. They came back to even more draconian laws which put them in prison for speaking out against the Raj. Anything written might have been, we say Ben was talking about words and Eleanor was talking about words mattering. You could have just written criticism about the Raj in a newspaper and you would be thrown into jail for sedition, no trial, not even knowing what you're charged with, hard labor. And so the north of India, this part, the city of Amritsar in the north, was restive and had been restive for many days. Gandhi was trying to keep it calm. He was trying to say that non-violent, passive resistance was the way forward. But this was a place that was bubbling with resentment. There are two leaders who are in this city of Amritsar, who are holding down the peace, two Indians called Satyapal and Kichlu, Gandhians. But they are getting such traction, such power, such enormous support from the natives that this man here, a man called Sir Michael O'Dwyer, cannot bear it. He's the Lieutenant Governor of India, and he hates these educated Indians, these upstarts who are arguing for some kind of say, because he does believe that there is a racial hierarchy and people like him are at the top and people like the Indians, well, they're right at the bottom. So he decides to have these two Gandhian leaders arrested. And what happens is Amritsar bursts into anger and rage. People think that these men have been arrested, that they're going to be hanged by morning. What will become of them? There are 2 days of immense violence in the city of Amritsar as they demand to have their people back. On April the 10th, this man is dispatched to Amritsar. April the 10th, 1919. His name is Rex Dyer. He's a brigadier general. He's never been to this city before, and he decides he's going to show them who is boss. He's disgusted with the fact that these natives don't salaam their betters when they pass, when the Brits pass in the street. He has them dragged to one side and taught a lesson. He sends a drum proclamation out. He arrives hot and dusty on the 10th, sends out a proclamation the next day saying, if anybody gathers in groups or has political speeches, they will be guilty of sedition and they could be shot. Curfews are brought in. But this is delivered by drum proclamation. So Amritsar, a very noisy city, it's not easy to get the word out. But he's done enough, he thinks. April the 13th is the important day of this story and the day where this whole story of the patient assassin is underpinned. It's Vaisakhi, it's the biggest festival in the north of India. Thousands of people from all over Punjab pour into this city. It's the harvest festival to give thanks at the Golden Temple. On this day, a political meeting is to be held by Gandhian supporters, so people who believe in non-violent resistance, and they choose this place that you can see, Jallianwala Bagh. It means the Garden of Jala, and to call it a garden is a mistake. It's a picture from 1919. It's more like scrubland, a very narrow entrance. 3 men side by side would be hard pushed to get in, unless they broke rank and went in behind each other. But this is where the political meeting is going to be held, and Rex Dyer decides this is where he's going to make his stand and show the Indians just who is boss. He drives 2 armored vehicles to this narrow entrance, 50 riflemen who are running behind him, Balochis and Gurkhas armed with rifles. Inside this place are 20,000 people. Men, women, and children, innocent civilians. Some, sure, are there for the political meeting. Some are there just to get away from the maelstrom that is Amritsar. They've gone to the Golden Temple. They're looking for somewhere to sit down and have a picnic. Why do I know that? Well, one of the reasons I know that is because my grandfather was there that day. A 19-year-old gangling youth with not a political bone in his body. So they're sitting, they're picnicking. Rex Dyer orders his men to go in. He orders them to take positions on this northern bank of the garden. People start scrabbling together, trying to get their things together. Surely these men are going to give some kind of order. They're going to tell us to leave. They're going to tell us to go. No order is given. The only voice that is heard is Rex Dyer's voice saying, fire. And his men fire, and fire, and fire, and fire. 1,650 bullets, and fire. People are running, screaming. They can't get out. There's only this one narrow entrance, and fire. 1,650 bullets. People go to the walls. They try and scrabble over. They can't get over. And fire. 1 bullet can go through 3 people at a time. There are a mass of people hiding behind this one scrubby tree in the middle of the garden. There's splinters and gobbets of blood flying everywhere. And fire. He fires for 10 sustained minutes. That must feel like a lifetime to these people. And then, as soon as he comes, he leaves. Doesn't allow any medical help to come in. Doesn't let people take their bodies of loved ones out. And wailing sweeps across the city. The curfew means that there is a night of horror for everybody who is in that garden. And they are forced to hear the screaming of the wounded turn to wailing, to whimpering, and then to silence. And there is a legend that an orphan, a similar age to my grandfather, is there until morning. And when the first light hits the earth, he picks up a clod of earth, rubs it against his head, and says, no matter how long it takes, no matter where it takes me, I'm going to find the men who did this, and I am going to kill them with as little mercy as they've shown my people. This is him, Udham Singh, the orphan of Amritsar, who's been saved by the city, brought up in an orphanage in this city. And he then embarks, as Eleanor quite rightly said, on a 20-year vendetta to try and become someone who can kill men this powerful. He is illiterate, he is the poorest of the poor, he is low caste, and nobody takes him seriously in India. So he travels around the world following the adage, my enemy's enemy is my friend. He goes to Africa and gets involved with anti-colonialists who hate the British as much as him. He goes to America and falls in with the Ghadar movement, where they train him how to change his appearance, change his face, forge documents, get hold of money. He travels to Russia. He falls in with the Bolsheviks, all because this man and the next man must die. They must die with as little mercy as they have shown his people. I go into a lot of detail in the book about how this humble man transforms himself into this chap, who in 1945, on March the 13th, has the guts to walk into a hall in Westminster, in the very heart of this city that I live in, a stone's throw. In fact, actually, let me be more accurate. Caxton Hall, where he decides to make his move, is as far away from the Houses of Parliament as Jallianwala Bagh is from the Golden Temple. There's a meeting of the great and good of the Raj. Udham Singh, who has now changed his name because words matter, to Muhammad Singh Azad, a Muslim name, a Sikh name, Azad meaning freedom, stands at the back of the hall, bides his time, walks to the front, and opens fire on that man, Sir Michael O'Dwyer. He fires 2 bullets straight through his heart. They travel at a near perfect parallel trajectory, and he leaves him to bleed on the floor, just as so many of his countrymen bled to death so many years before. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Anita. That's a story, of course, a tragedy that we grew up with in India and know of, but it's incredible that it hasn't. I mean, it's not something that's known in other parts of the world. And thank you so much for that book, in which you not only unearth the story, but you take us on this journey, in a way of one man, but in a way we all are there, looking for what kind of justice follows acts like this. What does retribution look like?
That's kind of you. I mean, I wanted to write about him, but also about the 2 men who perpetrated this. The man, Sir Michael, who was the brains, hearts, and guts of that entire operation in Punjab, and the man, Rex Dyer, who fired the bullets. Because people are human beings, and it is important to understand their motivations, their thoughts, so that we can avoid this kind of thing in the future.
Yeah, and thank you for also, I think we started by saying this event is about language, but actually we see that language also means it's about empire, it's about colonialism, it's about hierarchies, it's about race. Thank you for making that connection. Thank you for being here tonight. I know that your children are waiting.
I've got to put 2 tiny people to bed now.
And I should just say too, obviously, as you can tell, Anita is a brilliant storyteller. The book is a fantastic read, and if you've got time on your hands, pick it up.
Absolutely, get a copy of The Patient Assassin. No. Yeah.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you very much for asking me. I really am very honored. Thank you.
Till soon. Well, and I'm really delighted to have our next speaker here. A wonderful friend, Sanjay Kuk, is a filmmaker and writer. He's really known for his award-winning documentary films, Red Ant Dream, which was really about the idea of the revolutionary ideal in India, and Jashn-e-Azadi, which translates to How We Celebrate Freedom, which is about the idea of freedom in Kashmir, one of the most militarized regions in the world. and also his work, Words on Water, which was about the Narmada Dam, one of the giant dam projects in central India. But today he's speaking to us about language in a very different way, the language of photography. He's curated, edited, and published a photo book called Witness, 9 photographers in Kashmir from 1986 to 2016. This sees the work of photographers within Kashmir, which is a region out of which very little is transmitted. Even now, they're going into month 7, I think, of an internet lockdown, the longest internet lockdown in a democracy in the history of, since we've had this medium. So it is a place out of which very little comes. And this book really broke that silence. It was nominated a New York Times Best Books of 2017. And one of the photographers featured there, Dar Yassin, was the recipient of this year's Pulitzer Prize for journalism. But really, more important than the accolades is what it did to question and show a different view than the state-enforced silence around Kashmir, whose people are actually, in a lockdown within a lockdown. Sanjay really describes how photography moves beyond testimony and actually maybe even becomes a contemporary art form, to look at how do you do creative practice in a zone like that. Sanjay's family is actually from Kashmir, and he describes it as a landscape that carries ancient burdens. And he's in Delhi right now, where it's just past midnight. So thank you, Sanjay, for staying up and being here with us. Please, everyone, a warm welcome for Sanjay Kuk.
Thank you. Thank you, Sirish. Thank you, the Indian Summer Festival, and of course, the wonderful 5x15 platform for bringing us all together. In a sense, I was sort of gearing up to speak about photography as a kind of language, and a language that also speaks to power. And I'm delighted that the 2 people who've gone ahead of me have already kind of plowed up the earth for us. Thank you, Sirish, for just reminding us that, at this time of the COVID pandemic, when all of us are so overwrought with the kind of silence and the isolation of the past 3 months. And I think it's important to remind everybody that for people in Kashmir, this lockdown in its present form is now at least 10 months old, and that it began on the 5th of August of 2019, when a very long-standing legal and constitutional relationship between India and the people of Jammu and Kashmir was abrogated without explanation, without process, without procedure. And the most terrible communications lockdown was kind of imposed. And I think it bears mention that in these 10 months, for the first month and a half, there was no telephone, there was no mobile phones, no landlines. For at least more than 5 months, as Sirish pointed out, people had no access to the internet, which he rightly points out is the longest internet shutdown in a democratic country. Even today, 10 months down the line, what we have is a incredible choking down of the internet to 2G speeds, as they're called. So for example, this conversation cannot take place with anybody in Kashmir. And this chokehold has, in a sense, when Ben Okri was speaking about I can't breathe, then there are various kinds of chokeholds that can be imposed on a people. And so in the time of the pandemic, for example, doctors cannot access important PDFs that they need to look at medical protocols. Students can't access their materials. Conversations can't take place in the way that have helped the world to survive. So it's just important to remember that. One other little something to do with language, which I want to place before you. The book is called Witness, and it's up on the screen here. The word in Urdu for witness, the word shaheed, is a word that often carries 2 meanings. there is the meaning of witness, but there is also the meaning of martyr. So the act of witnessing would say in Urdu be called shahadat, but shahadat is also martyrdom. So there is this delightful ambiguity in between these two words. And it's not just in Urdu, it's also in Persian, which is a language and a culture which deeply inflects Kashmir, and even in Arabic. So for example, even in the Quran, you have this.
Sanjay, we seem to have, there we go.
I'm back.
Sorry, we just.
Yeah, so some gremlin in the system. So I just wanted to place this kind of this duality between the act of witnessing and the act of martyrdom as being the kind of space that the book tries to travel through. So this is the book Witness, and physically it's, I'm trying to move it ahead. Yeah. So it looks like that. It's like an archival folder, although much of the material is very contemporary. I'm going to show you just a few images from each of the photographers. I'll begin with Merajuddin. So he has, I'm going to show you 4 images by Merajuddin. The first is this, and it's called Baker's Assistant at a Security Check, Srinagar, 1992. This one is the assassination of a judge, Nilkant Ganju, Srinagar, 1989. And crackdown by army soldiers, Srinagar, 1993. And finally, what's called Aftermath of a Siege, which followed the destruction of the much revered Sufi shrine of Char Sharif in 1989. But the other photographers, you know, they carved their own language for themselves. And so, for example, with Javed Shah, who was a photographer with the Indian Express, this image called After a Fidain Attack. And again, his image, Militant Killed in Attack, Srinagar, 2004. I just want to remind you that these were newspaper photographs, and it says something about a certain time when newspapers would be able to carry such difficult images. The third photographer is someone who already has been alluded to, Dar Yassin. His work with the AP team in Kashmir got him the Pulitzer this year. This one is called Police Take Cover, Srinagar, 2015. And this image called Funeral of a Militant, Pehlipura, 2016. Javed Dar, who follows, is also an extraordinary photojournalist, but many of his most interesting pictures for me come out of the margins of his photojournalistic work. It's sometimes what he sees on the way or from news assignments, and sometimes in the aftermath, such as this picture, which is called After the Fire, Frislan, 2016. Altaf Qadri, another very exceptional photojournalist with a deeply, deeply humane eye. This image called Aftermath of a Grenade Attack, Srinagar, 2006. And this very moving picture called Grave of a Militant Commander, Avalura, 2008. Also in the book is Shumit Dayal, a very, very skilled photographer. His work in Kashmir is mostly on film and on black and white. And much of it is actually an excavation of his own family's albums, which he then mixes with what he shoots. So this image, for example, is a composite of an image he has shot with, in this case, not the front image of a photograph from a family album, but the back of his grandfather's, a photograph taken by his grandfather. We move on to Shakata Nanda, who lives in the North Kashmir town of Baramulla. Shaukat, this called Sakib on the Run, this image from Baramulla 2014. It's part of a set of 10 or 12 images that he has taken about these young men who can't stay at home during the day because the police are looking for them. So they inhabit, abandoned buildings, and in this case, a graveyard on the outskirts of the city. Or this sort of photojournalistic image, but extraordinary in its own ways, called Protester with Slingshot, Srinagar 2010. Syed Shahryar is a very, very young photographer. This extraordinary photograph called Funeral of a Militant, Tral 2016. And then this very quirky image called Police Announcement, Srinagar 2016. And finally, I began with the work of Merajuddin, who was touching 60 when the book came out, and the book ends with the work of Azan Shah, who was not even 20 when the book came out 2 years ago. And Azan sees himself as a photographer of the city, shoots both in color and black and white. This image of the Fateh Kadal Bridge in Srinagar, 2015. And then this one called Friday Protest, Srinagar, 2015. So that's the book, Witness. And I just wanted to say that all 9 photographers in this book, as you would have gathered, men, but in the 2 years since the book came out, we now have some remarkable young women emerging, photojournalists, some of them, and photographers. And so in a sense, that search for a language through photography, it seems to every year we see more and more people coming into the field, and it's becoming, they've sort of laid claim to photography as a kind of valid intervention. And my time is nearly up, but I just want to leave one last idea with you, which is that the scholar, and she writes on photography, Ariella Azule, talks about the civic contract of photography, and specifically alludes to this situation in which the photographer, the subject, and the audience are tied in a kind of pact, which speaks to the outside world, but also speaks to itself. And I find that absolutely fascinating, that in a place which had no tradition of photography before the conflict exploded 30 years ago, has, without any assistance, there are no photography schools, has kind of found itself in a place where now photography has become a language that Kashmiris claim for themselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay. And I mean, I think thanks for also making that connection to language, and that Shahid is both witness and martyr. That really struck. And obviously, even Ben was referring to that, and so was Anita. Witnesses, whether in the case of Jallianwala Bagh or in the case of the murder of George Floyd, have been what have, recorded the moment, shared it. And to witness, you first have to see. And so thank you for the book that helps us to see Kashmir.
I think it's extraordinary, Sanjay, and it's so important. And thank you for bringing your voice also to us. I think what's happening in Kashmir and the weaponization of the internet is on many levels highly disturbing. And I know that some people are watching from around the world, and some of those actors are not benevolent actors. I think that it is a very chilling example that is being set, and I think it's very, very important that the voice of Kashmiris and the images of what is happening continue to be sent out into the world. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you.
We've come to look at photography as a language, and I think I would like to now introduce our next speaker, whose work is so entwined with language and whose art is so entwined with language, Marianne Nicholson. Marianne is an artist, activist of the Muskamak Jawadunuk First Nations of the Pacific Northwest Coast, And she's trained both in her traditional Kwakwakiwak forms of culture, but she's also well at ease in contemporary museum-based practice. So in a way, she dances between those two worlds. She also has a PhD in linguistics and anthropology, looking at space as is expressed in her language and her culture. So I think, what's really interesting, I've been a huge fan of her work from afar, so it's a particular thrill that she agreed to do this and is here with us. Everything she's done, some of them are monumental public art installations. Some of them are actually going back to her own lands and painting pictographs. So in a way, it is about art speaking from and also being spoken onto the land. And she's, of course, exhibited all over the world, the 17th Biennale of Sydney in Australia, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the National Museum of the American Indian in New York. And of course, her works can be seen upon arrival or departure from Vancouver in the airport. But I think, the work that was most moving to me, and I'm so happy that she will speak about it today, is the work of the place she came from and that she took back to the lands that she comes from. So thank you so much, Marianne, for being here with us. And please, a warm, warm welcome to Marianne Nicholson.
Yes, hello, everyone. I wanted to acknowledge the strength of the words of the speakers today. I've been particularly moved by them. I find that the conversations that we are having today cut to the very root of what is in my heart and my spirit as a Muskmak Taodeno person who has struggled all of my life to uphold our way of being and our stories, because the stories that were being overlaid on top of our stories and on top of our lives have been smothering us as peoples. So I'm very grateful for all the voices that are rising up across the world to speak their truths and to tell the powerful, powerful stories that we all need to hear and share in order so that we can create the change that we need to see in the world. So I want to show, start with an image. We can show the first slide of a work that was done in 1921 in my home community of Kinkum Inlet. And my great-grandfather, his brothers, they were put in jail for practicing our traditions, our potlatching. In 1921, there was a whole large group of Kwakwakiwak who were jailed, and basically just for giving a speech or for giving things away in our potlatch system. And as an act of resistance against that, my ancestors, my great-grandfather's family, they had this painting done at the mouth of the river, and it showed all these coppers, what we call takwa, which are symbols of wealth and of our traditional ways and relationship to the land. They had those painted on the rocks, and then they painted these cows because they had actually implicated the farmer who had annexed our territory at the mouth of the river into selling them these cows, which they then feasted on, which was basically part of the potlatch system, which was what they were being put in jail for. And it's such a powerful, powerful image to grow up. You go in and out of the community and you always pass this place and see this image. And this image, it operates like a language. And so I became very intrigued in how these images were telling stories. And it was interesting because I ended up in my dissertation work that I did, I was looking at language and the language and how Kwakwala, our language, expresses the idea of space. And what I found through all of that study was that our bodies, the language that we speak, our traditional language, is so attached to our physical bodies in space, in the land. And so I became came back full circle to be interested again in these images that are actually physically painted by the body on the land in order to help us to remember, to communicate. So if we go to the next slide, this is an image of a work that I did in 1998. It's nearby, it's close to that 1921 pictograph. But I did this in 1998 because at that time, the logging company was completely devastating our valley, and they were basically they were removing all of the wood, and they were wreaking havoc within that watershed. And our community was still there, even though the government, the Canadian government, actively worked hard to remove us. We really were stubborn and stayed there. And at that time, when I was living at home, I had wanted to create something that no one could deny our presence, because that's what was happening. The Canadian state was really denying our presence and erasing us. And so I wanted to create something that was so large and so visible that no one could deny our presence there. So this is a photograph of the painting that was done, the pictograph that was done in 1998. But this was taken about a year ago, I guess. So if we go to the next image, this just basically gives you a sense of the scale of that image. But what's important to me in this image is that it actually shows what is on that painting. And that painting is our origin story. So it made manifest in the land in this very physical way, very visible way, our presence in the land from the very beginning. So this is our origin story, how we came to be in this place thousands and thousands of years ago. And this image validates that. So if we go to the next slide, or next image, this is an example of jumping into some of the contemporary-based work and then approaching spaces such as art spaces, institutionalized spaces, and trying to question and situate these discussions within those spaces and challenging the colonial foundations of those spaces by bringing forward the stories that are not or have been suppressed. And so this is a work that was done in Nova Scotia about a year ago. But the title of it is The Sun Shines, the Rivers Flow, which is acknowledging that much of the treaty language in Canada that is spoken about refers to as long as the sun shines and the rivers flow, and it refers to the Indigenous rights and title to their lands. The problem being that the agreement was made with this statement in mind that it would be forever, it would be a relationship that would be forever, and that colonization has been attempting to erase that relationship. And so this statement basically says the sun is still shining, the rivers are still flowing, you know, we still have this relationship and we maintain this relationship and continue this relationship. If we go to the next image, this is a work that was done in Surrey, and it's a light projection onto a large recreation center in that place, and it was called The Way in Which It Was Given to Us, and this is an animation, so it's a moving image in it, and I worked with some Kwantlen people whose land that is to develop the storyline that would talk about how their lands were annexed in the same way that my own nation's lands were annexed through colonization and removed from their jurisdiction, and to make this statement that they still hold that jurisdiction. Those lands are still there, they've never given them up. So this is a still from that animation that shows these in pictograph forms, the story, but then as you move through the animation, it gives more history behind what really happened. And the problem that we have, particularly here in British Columbia, is that much of this history has been suppressed. Shockingly, it's taken me my whole life to bring these histories back to the foreground, and it's so badly needed for us to come together to shine the light of these stories into people's hearts. If we go to the next image, this is another work that is called The Harbinger of Catastrophe. And I really wanted to talk about the relationship of the physical and the ephemeral, the relationship of the body and space, and in a way express how for us, how we were taught in our traditional way to think of ourselves as part of this continuum, that really what was real was what was considered ephemeral in the outside world. You know, the outside world seems so obsessed with the physical body, physical things. And yet what we were in our traditional understanding was that really our physicality was momentary, that we were part of this spiritual continuum from the ancient past into the far future, that we carried a responsibility to remember and to hold in our minds, and that as our individual independent selves, we were not as significant as the way it is presented in the outside world. So I wanted to create this piece that would kind of challenge these ideas, and so, you know, you can walk through this physical space, and the glass, there's the glass chest in the middle is very physically tangible and attractive, but really what makes that room have spirit is the light that casts the shadows onto the walls. And I was trying to anchor that within this idea that without these teachings, we're heading towards catastrophe as human beings in the world. If we go to the next image, this is the one that actually is so significant to me, because it was done with my community. So this was done in just last year. So what we did was I had done that large pictograph in 1998, but I had done it on my own. And I mean, while it has tremendous meaning, I felt very strongly that I needed to facilitate a work that would bring in other voices, other bodies, like to bring us together, because that sense of community is what is the strength of our people. So this is an image of the finished work, but what we did as a community was we went out into our territories and we stayed together out there for a number of days, and we created this work together. And I designed the main images in the center, those 4 coppers, those patwa, but the outside images were all done by community members. And we did a period of workshops where people thought about what mattered to them and what they wanted to put on that as a message that would be carried forward to future generations. If we go to the next slide, then this is basically people like the community members working together on the work. And then if we go to the next image, here's one of our young people who is standing by the piece that he's created. And then if we go to the next image, which is the last image, this is something that we chose to do, to put all of our hands together on the land. And to me, it is the most meaningful part of all of this, is that we physically were present, and now we have left that message as a story to tell amongst all of our people to our own descendants, and also out to the world who is still trying to claim those lands and exploit those lands for profit against our own experience of what that place is and how we understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. That's incredible to see that work that you've been doing. And I think a lot of people here know that Indigenous people are still amongst the most fiercest defenders of the land. Whenever you see a protest here, whenever you see a rallying cry to save the earth from some sort of project that seeks to destroy it, Indigenous people are often at the forefront of that. So that stewardship continues, that relationship is very much alive. And thank you for sharing that again. And again, it comes to, when we think of language, it was so powerful that you saw that image going in and out of your community. And then you created, in a way, a conversation by doing your own piece 100 years later.
Yeah, thank you.
I love too the the idea of the materiality and the sort of the colonial obsession with the material. I think exactly as Sirish says, as we try and have to rethink our frameworks, as you know, in response to a number of challenges, not least, you know, pandemics and climate change. I think it's so useful and so enlightening to have, you know, the stories of Aboriginal Canadians to help us, you know, illuminate potential other ways and ways that might bring us forward. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I think in a way I was going to say that my thanks mainly goes to the idea of a resurgence. And again, resurgence is a word that invokes a tidal, a watery force, and that your art is near water is also so fitting. So thank you for pointing to the resurgence of language and of culture.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Take care. So, I mean, in speaking of language, our next speaker plays with that in interesting ways. I mean, a lot of us in India from various communities know you know, similar to what Marianne was saying, know what it feels like to have your language either criminalized or silenced, or you're made to feel ashamed of the language you grew up in. And then English was upheld as sort of the ideal. I really got to know Kritika Pandya from, I think, an article in Granta magazine. And then I read an interview with her in Scroll magazine where she said, I even dream in English. And English, of course, is that hybrid between Hindi and English, which has resulted in a really dynamic, interesting language of its own. Kritika is an Indian writer from Jharkhand in India, central India, but she's currently in Amherst, Massachusetts, where she's a graduate of the MFA program for poets and writers over there. So she's on the East Coast at the moment. She's also the winner of this year's Commonwealth Short Story Prize, the 2020 prize, the Asia winner, which counts for about a couple of billion people. She's, in a couple of days, we'll know if she's the global winner. So congrats, Kritika, on all these achievements. And Kritika speaks about the hybridity and fluidity of language, the Queen's English, and the connection between Bollywood and Shakespeare. Please welcome Kritika Pandya.
Thank you so much, Sirish, Eleanor, and the entire team of the Indian Summer Festival. I'd also like to thank all the speakers who went before me. Thank you for sharing such insightful, beautiful, and moving conversations that are so relevant for everyone around the world. And I'm deeply honored to be part of this stellar set of speakers and thinkers. My talk would be really a personal sort of account of my engagement with the English language as somebody who grew up in Jharkhand. When I was growing up in Ranchi, which is the capital of Jharkhand, it was a town with no traffic lights, only traffic policemen. And there was one store which sold cornflakes, which were all the rage, especially among young people. And my father got out of bed at 2 in the morning to stand in queues outside the few English medium schools where my mother wanted me to study. She would not settle for anything less. She would not have her daughter feel underconfident in the company of English-speaking people. But these schools had a limited number of application forms for admissions every year. So my mother would pack breakfast for my father, just so he didn't have to exit a queue without getting a form, even if he got hungry. And some years later, I would be ashamed of my mother and father when they attended parents-teachers meetings at my school and mumbled a few English phrases mixed with Hindi as the teachers told them about what I'd accomplished, praised me, criticized me. At times, I would even confront my parents about it. I would tell them, why can't you speak proper English? If I can learn it, I'd persist. Why can't you? Nevertheless, every time we drove around town, my father slowed down his motorcycle as it approached a bookstore. "Do you want to see if they have something new?" he would ask me. I smelled every book before turning it around and ruminating over the price. $4.50, I'd say, that is costly. But my father paid this shopkeeper before I made up my mind. "Books are never costly," he said. Not having read any of the books, I lost myself in each night because they were all written in English, not Hindi, which was his primary language. Later at night, I read in bed while he tied the 4 strings of the mosquito net in the 4 designated corners, one on the doorknob, the other on a nail sticking out of the wall, yet another on the window grill, and the 4th held down by a big jug of water on my study table, before tucking the loose ends under my mattress to keep the malarial mosquitoes off me, as I silently read away from him. This one time, as a troubled teenager, I wrote a letter to my mother, which she never read because she simply couldn't. I had used too many American slangs to express my teenage angst. It was as if my parents were beginning to lose track of me and I of them. So once, tired of my constant drama about her lack of English language skills, my mother told me, "तुम्हारे एडमिशन इंटरव्यू में तो हम वेंसडे को वेंसडे तक बोले थे, काफी नहीं है?" I had even pronounced Wednesday as Wednesday during your admission interview. Isn't that enough? She went on to explain then that my school's admission committee didn't accept kids whose parents couldn't speak at least functional English, which mine fortunately could. But many parents didn't even attend the admission interviews of their own kids.
I think we've lost Kritika for a second, but let's try and bring her back up if we can. Just bear with us as we sort this out. There is an additional language to be learnt, the language of the internet.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're not working on 2G, but
yeah,
it has its quirks all the same, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So let's just see where audience, stick with us for a second as we pull Kritika back in. If we don't get her in on video at the very least, we'll bring her in by phone because we've got her phone number and we can patch her in that way. So the tech team will turn around. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating what she's talking about. I mean, growing up in India, I certainly felt all of that.
What's your favorite English word?
It's funny because I grew up in a completely different language, which is Kannada, the language of the South. So there's all these different Englishes that are based on where you're from. So as in India, of course, we have 22 official languages and thousands of dialects. So every time English meets one of these languages, it takes on a different hybrid. So yeah, my language is Kannada, which sounds a lot like Canada.
Let's hear some Kannada in Canada.
Yeah, there's about 70 million people who speak it, and it's got a literary history of a couple of thousand years. So yeah, lots of books being written even today, a very vibrant culture. So it's funny that you don't even know such a language that exists, but twice the population of Canada speaks it.
And tell me, does it have the same kind of hybrid forms with English as the dominant language?
Yeah, when it meets the street, and especially in urban settings, you know, that tends to happen. Yeah, so it becomes this. It's a very urban thing. But now, of course, with mobile phones being everywhere, there's this hybrid language that mixes functionality with being cool, with you know. You have to know so many languages. I had a job one summer working in the garden of this woman who spoke 6 languages, and she would construct one sentence using a word from each. And you had to know all of them to understand her, or you'd get like, you know, whatever you could understand. So yeah,
That's kind of amazing, actually. But I mean, it is true that certain languages express certain things. I'm not sure if this pertains to, instructions for how to do a garden, but
Kritika's back.
Kritika.
We've been waffling on about language brilliantly than you. So welcome back. You were saying something. I think you were at the point of saying that you wrote a letter full of teenage angst, and then the parents wouldn't go with their kids to admission. So
yeah. And so when my mother informed me about what really went on during the admission processes at all of these English medium schools in Ranchi, I began to think about the relationship between the language of my formal education and the language of my upbringing. And for the first time, I admitted to my parents, as well as to myself, that every other day at school, I actually had to pay 20 or so rupees from my pocket money to my class teacher for fines for talking in Hindi outside of Hindi classes. And if my teacher was in a particularly bad mood, I would even have to write, I will only English, I will only talk in English, I will only talk in English 100 times, sometimes even 500 times, and always in perfect cursive. I was well in my early 20s when I learned about a man called Thomas Babington Macaulay. In 1835, when India was under British colonial regime, this man was working towards ensuring that English was the language of formal education in most leading Indian institutions. He said that English is better worth knowing than Sanskrit or Arabic. In other words, Macaulay was convinced that Western education was superior. And therefore, there was a need to produce a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. These people would then help transmit the Western ideals to the rest of the Indian population. But cut to 2020, the recipe notebook in my kitchen has the following directions for cooking aloo bengan, which I'd taken down while my mother was dictating them to me before I left for attending grad school in the United States. Warm tel, preferably mustard. Put panchforan or 2 to 3 garlic cloves. Now put bengan and tomatoes and aloo chopped in chota pieces. Turmeric 1 chutki add karo, salt swad anusar. No need to add pani, just cover it अच्छे से. Make sure flame is dhima, not high. 50-20 minutes ke baad, it should be ready. Garnish with lemon or coriander. And if in case my aloo bangan doesn't taste exactly like the one my mother prepares, I listen to a Bollywood song that goes, Frastiyao nahi mora, narbhasao nahi mora, anytime moodwa ko, upsetao nahi mora. Jo bhi wrong hua hai use, set right wa karo ji, nahi lujiye ji hope, thoda fight wa karo ji. This is a song full of hope and resistance. And one close look at the lyrics, and I knew that this was neither Hindi nor English nor Bhojpuri or Nagpuri, but a heady mix of all of these languages. So as you can imagine, every time I listen to this song, I'm assured that Thomas Babington Macaulay is turning in his grave. He wanted to invent a new kind of Indians, but we ended up a whole new language to suit ourselves instead. Shakespeare is supposed to have added hundreds of new words and phrases to the English language. That is what Bollywood is attempting today, and not self-consciously or even necessarily inspired by this English playwright, which means that Bollywood is as Shakespearean as Shakespeare was Bollywoodian. When young people in India get together, they use the English language in very imaginative ways. The experimentation is at the level of grammar, syntax, spellings, and more. To take an example, if you want to say, she's awesome, these are some variations of that sentence with mostly Hindi influences, but also that of some other Indian languages. And I'm going to read them out in proper Hinglish, like I would if I was chilling with my friends. Awesome she is. Awesome only she is. Full awesome she is. You have to say full, like full awesome she is. So awesome she is. So must she is. She is so much awesome. She's full awesome. She's full must. she's full must only. She's full awesome only. In other words, she is awesome. She really is. Chinua Achebe, one of my favorite writers, says that the price a world language must be willing to pay is submission to many different kinds of views. He wrote, the English language will be able to carry the weight of my African experience, but it will have to be a new English, still in full communion with its ancestral home, but altered to suit its new African surroundings. He believes that for African writers, giving up the English language as simply a post-colonial baggage would be like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He emphasizes the role of the language in unifying Africa. African nations, says Achebe, were created in the first place by the invention of the British, which I hasten to add is not saying that the peoples comprising these nations were invented by the British. I am an Indian writer who writes in the English language, which means that I owe it to my fraught post-colonial context, even though there really isn't a post to the colonial, to engage with the English language and culture on my own terms. At school, we were taught that Shakespeare compared a woman's beauty to a summer's day as we sat in muggy classrooms, sweating all over, because Indian summers are scorching tropical conditions. But now I have the opportunity to create the literature of my people in a version of English that could confound Shakespeare himself. And I'm up for that task, or dare I say, I'm full ready for the task one. Thank you.
Thanks, Kritika. I'm sure you're full ready for the taskwa. And
I think that was full awesome.
Thank you.
Super only. And yeah, thanks. I love that line you just threw in there. There's no post in post-colonial.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we would say in my Kannada slang, sakat. But yeah, congratulations and good luck. We'll watch for you in the next 3 days when the Commonwealth Global Prize is announced. Congratulations on winning the Asia Prize already, and thanks again for taking us through a short introduction to English. I look forward to the full primer sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kritika. Thank you. So it's left to me to introduce our final speaker for the evening. And having had this wonderful tour of language and its meaning and use and misuse, it is really wonderful to have Aza Raskin with us. Aza is the co-founder of a project called the Earth Species Project. It's an open source, not-for-profit that's dedicated to decoding animal communication. But that is just one feather in his many feathered caps. He is also co-founder of the very influential and groundbreaking Center for Humane Technology. He's also co-hosts a very popular podcast called Your Undivided Attention. Aza has also founded 3 companies that he has led from founding to acquisition. He's a co-chairing member of the World Economic Forum's AI Global Council. He is a mathematician by training and also knows a thing or two about dark matter physics, which I'm sure comes really in handy. But we're really, really delighted that you could be with us, Aza. I'm really thrilled that we are turning our final attention to those whose language we do not understand and whose existence is so crucial to our continued well-being as human animals. So Aza, over to you, and a very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. That's a beautiful introduction, and it's nice to finally see you. And it is a true privilege to get to share, well, if not a stage, then pixels with Kritika and Marianne, and Sanjay, Ben, and Anita. Something I was reflecting on during their conversations is that language is a particularly remarkable tool that changes the lens by which the mind sees. And when you swap language, you swap the lens by which you see everything. The map is not the territory, and language is not reality, but it's a model of reality. And the language that you use terraforms reality. So the map is not the territory, but the map terraforms the territory and creates this incredible cyclic loop by which we see the world. And I think it's the idea that if you can swap language, you swap the lens by which your mind sees the world, which gets to the heart of something that I've found true in my own life, but I think we all experience this. And that is that shifts in perspective can change everything. It's that nothing has changed, and yet everything is different. And this particular story around translating animal communication, discovering animal language, started, at least for me, in 2013. The history of this goes back centuries, but for me, it started in 2013 when I heard an NPR piece about these incredible monkeys, gelato monkeys in the Ethiopian highlands. And they're known to have one of the largest vocabularies of any primate. The researchers that work with them swear that the monkeys are talking about them behind their backs. The problem is there just wasn't enough data to be able to translate. And the thought was like, okay, but if we could go out and put microphones in the field, a huge microphone array, capture an entire species at once, and make a sort of a digital footprint, could we translate their language? And in 2013, the answer was no. Because in order to translate a language, you have to have examples of translation. But with animals, you don't have that. And so every year would return. 2013 was a possible no. 2014 was a possible no. 2015, no. But something remarkable changed in 2017. In 2017, back to back, October 30th and October 31st, two different papers independently discovered different techniques to do the same thing. And that was to translate languages without any examples of how to translate, without any key, without any Rosetta Stone. And the process is actually remarkably simple. It was also in 2013 that researchers discovered that you could build a shape that represents language. Think of it as sort of a galaxy where every star is a word. And actually, right behind me here, you can't see it super well, but this is actually the shape of English, the top 10,000 most spoken words. And in high resolution, you can really see the points move around. What's interesting about this shape is that points that mean similar things are placed near each other. So fast and faster are sort of near each other. Dog and cat are somewhat near each other, but cat and lion are even closer together. And what's cool about this shape is that it's not just words that mean similar things are near each other. It's that the relationship between concepts, between words, is represented geometrically, which is to say, king is to man as woman is to queen, as an analogy. So analogies have geometric form. So king is the same distance and direction to man as woman is to queen. And so you can actually just do king minus man is this distance and direction. You add it to queen, and that just, or woman, and that just equals woman. There's a direction in here for what I call pretentiousness. And that's just book is to tome, as say smelly is to malodorous. And so you can just do book minus tome, that's pretentiousness direction, you add it to smelly and it equals malodorous. It's a really beautiful and sort of amazing thing. And it all stems from actually a 1958 realization from J.R. Firth, who is a British linguist. And he said, you shall know a word by the company that it keeps. And that's how these models are built up. They're essentially looking at the context of every word. The computer doesn't understand the word, but it understands the words that are near it. And from that out pops the shape. Okay, so we have the shape for Japanese. We have the shape for German. We have the shape for English. What do you do then? And here is the really, really surprising thing. It couldn't just be the case that you could take English and rotate it on top of Chinese and that they would fit, because the cultures are different, the context is different, the history is different, we see the world in different ways. And yet, when researchers tried it, the two shapes lined up. Not perfectly, words mean slightly different things, but the relationships between things are similar enough that the shapes match up, and the point which is dog in English overlaps with the point which is dog in Chinese. And that doesn't work for just English and Chinese, but for Japanese and for Esperanto and for Finnish and for Turkish. Almost all human languages seem to share a kind of universal shape. And I just think that is incredibly profound and deeply surprising. It's not something I think any one of us would have expected before we tried it out. Because when we look at each other, we see our differences in context and histories. And what deep learning is teaching us in a way is to see the similarities underlying us all. What's interesting is you can go even further. There's a recent study where they put people into fMRIs, brain scanners. They had them look at objects, they knew what the objects were, and then they would scan their visual cortex. And they learned a mapping. That is to say, from the scan, they could predict, they could reconstruct what the person was seeing. And that already is sort of surprising because we're able to look inside someone's mind and extract what they're seeing. But what's even weirder is that the mapping that worked for me would work for you, would work for someone else. There's something universal about this mapping. And what's really intriguing is, and no one's tried this yet, can we map language into the space, which is what we see in our brains? Is there a correspondence? We don't know, but it's very, very intriguing. All right, so one way of thinking about why this works is this. Language is sort of like a style, right? Like imagine French is like pointillism. And maybe, I know, German is like brutalism. Hopefully I won't get in trouble for any of these things. The way the types of strokes of the paintbrush, the colors they use, very different. And yet when you step back and you look at the pictures in pointillism and brutalism, you can sort of see the similarities because both paintings are mapping sort of, they keep consistent the internal relationships of the world that they're painting. And what deep learning is learning how to do, and what these shaped rotations are learning how to do, is to translate between the styles, keeping the relationships inside of every worldview the same. And this really gets to the heart of another of my favorite parts of language, which is metaphor. What is a metaphor? It's a hard thing to think through. But I think a metaphor is actually very simple. It is just a map that preserves relationships. Right? It lets you understand something you can't see with something that you can by mapping the relationships and the thing you can see to the thing that you can't. And once you understand metaphors in this way, a lot opens up, or at least for me. An example is math, geometry. Klein, a famous geometer and also progenitor of quantum theory, he described geometry as the mapping of space to itself that preserves angles. That's it, that's all of geometry. It's a metaphor of space to itself. What is translation? Translation is a map that preserves connotations, right? It's a map that preserves analogies. And that gets to one of the most beautiful sort of summarization of all of my favorite terms, which is that translation is a metaphor that preserves analogies. I just think that's so cool. And we can finally understand when we rotate one language onto another to translate between the two, that is a computational metaphor. So we've sort of gone way out. We'll come back in. Why are we so excited about the ability to translate between languages without a key, without a Rosetta Stone? It's because for the first time we can start to ask, well, if we can build the shape for human language, we can definitely build the shape for animal communication. And then the question becomes, what shape is it? Does it fit anywhere in the universal human meaning shape? Maybe. Or does it actually match better to human emotions and the facial gestures that people make? Or maybe it maps better to human music. Or maybe it looks more like images or 3D models. We don't know, but we're on the cusp of finding out. So in the end, I think that these kinds of tools are going to be the telescope times the microscope of our era. because they let us see at greater granularity we've ever seen before, and also with greater scope than we've ever seen before. And the telescope, right, it fundamentally shifted human perspective and human identity. It let us look out at the patterns of the universe, and what it taught us is that Earth was not at the center. I think these tools are the telescope of our era, but they're going to be a kind of internal looking. They're going to let us look at the patterns of the universe, and what we're going to discover is that humanity is not at the center of the universe. And that kind of humility and interdependence is what I think we all need to be able to survive. Thank you.
Asa, how wonderful. Thank you so much. That's such a stimulating, wild ride of a talk and concepts. And, you know, I am so moved by the scale of your ambition, but also the idea that, you know, what we can get so bogged down in feeling, in identifying difference actually on a geographical sort of map is the same. So good luck with, tell us anyway, what's the time horizon for decoding animal language? Is there one?
I mean, really hard to say. We're walking off fundamentally into the unknown. We think, you know, we're already making substantial progress now. So I'm hesitant to give like a timeline. But one of the things I'm most excited about is that we're building this library, the Earth Species Library. And it just starts to collect many, many, many different of the cultures and behaviors, communications of the species of Earth. And the reason why I think this is so cool is that science is really fundamentally a comparative kind of game. And this lets us look at the shape of, say, sperm whale to understand humpback whale, to understand dolphin, to understand orca, to understand bat, to understand. And so you can start to see how the whole thing starts to create this huge set of contexts with which you compare one to the other. Every language becomes a key to decode the lock of every other language. Everything is a metaphor for everything else. So yeah, I don't know the timeline, but I think much sooner than we expect.
I love that all the while the English language is swirling behind you.
Yes.
I'll forever keep the image of you as astronomer of language.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So yeah, much good luck with the galaxies you're off to discover, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Sirish.
Yeah, please everyone check out Earth Species and all of Asa's other projects. It's quite incredible what he's been doing.
Thank you, Asa. Thank you for being with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eleanor, that just leaves us. That was
my God, how much stimulation has that been? It's always a thrill and always an honor to get to spend time with incredible people with extraordinary thoughts and doing amazing things. And this evening has been morning for you has been no exception. What amazing people have joined us and given us their thoughts, and very, very profound. I felt like there was a lot to think about and reflect upon, and
I hope, in a way, tools for the world we are trying to make sense of now, you know, in so many ways. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to do this together, you know, given all the distance. And let's chat more as time goes on. I really enjoyed doing this, and I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight. Really so much for joining us on this journey. And again, if those of you who've supported the festival, thank you for doing so. If others found this event of value and you're able to make a donation, that would really be appreciated to keep us going. Next Saturday, we partner with the Surrey Art Gallery. Marianne Nicholson showed one of her works that she did in partnership with them to present the writer Shauna Singh Baldwin, the filmmaker Baljit Sangra, and the artist Sandeep Johal in conversation on feminist thinking, society, and place. That's a lunchtime conversation. Stay tuned for the next few Saturdays in July, and Eleanor, in County Cork, it's almost nighttime. So very good night. And thanks again. I mean, really 5x15, what you co-founded has been such an incredible way of bringing together some really powerful thinkers and speakers. So thank you for doing that and for always being such a lovely partner.
We're just the vehicle. Thank you, Sirish, and congratulations on your 10th anniversary. That's fantastic. And also for keeping the flame alive in these very uncertain times for us event organizers, of course, but of course to everyone listening in too. So thank you. Also, I would just like to ask everyone in the audience, please do share the insights, the thoughts that you've gathered, and do share it widely on your media circles and social media, because it is so important, I think, that we spread these voices so that they're heard as widely as possible.
For sure. And a big shout out to the Indian Summer team and the tech team. This has been quite something to pull together. So yeah.
They've done an amazing job.
All right, everyone. Take good care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.